Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. I'm your host, Marcus Lloyd, and with me in the studio is lots of folks today. We got an opportunity to really kind of respond and think through some things for the election, and so it's fun to bring in the whole crew. So we'll start with the one who's usually with me, as always, Antoine Malone in the house. Antoine, what's going on? Good to see you, brother. You doing all right?
What's up? What's up? Hello, all. Hello, everyone who's on the call and on the call. Is this a? Should we?
You can. I mean, we are.
Should we say a call or
there's numbers were involved.
Whatever it is we're doing right now.
Call in to engage it. Yes, welcome.
I may or may not be eating some lemon heads while
so the crackling, if you hear it, will be.
If you hear the crackle of the.
Yes,
I pre-opened mine.
I have both lemon head and chewy lemon heads because that's
why not?
That's the way we're doing it today.
All right, kind of a sour and sour, but which one did you? It depends on the dental work you've had recently, I guess, to see which ones that'll be going down. So Antoine's in the house, and you've already heard the Betty Rubble giggle of Pepper, who's also in the house with her mints as well. Anybody who watches knows she loves mint, so she's got her peppermints with her. So it's good. I know you just love the peppermint. Yes.
Yeah.
Glad you're here, Pep in the house. Or those who are watching, you'll see this weird name in front of her called Janelle. I don't know whose name that is, but that's who she is. Also going around, you recognize Chino over there, also known as Kylie. Hello there, Chino. How are you today?
Yep. That's
You've got to use words. People can't all see. This is like people are listening as well. Nodding heads is not.
I guess a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, I guess. Well, yeah, we need a couple of words to go with that picture, though. Yes.
Great. I am doing good.
Good. Welcome in. And for those of you who watch Color Commentary, you may not recognize some of these folks, but they are key folks in the midst of the threaded ecosphere on our staff. So I will start with one of my favorite people in the world, Myra Milton. Hello, Myra. Good.
Hello.
I wanted to make you wonder who it was going to be for just a second, because I know how Myra gets about that. Myra Milton's in the house. How are you, Myra?
I'm good. How are you?
Of course. Great. And also one of my favorite people in the world, Keith Heilman as well. So, Keith, how are you?
Howdy. I've got my icebreakers instead.
Okay. I didn't know this was going to be a candy call. We should have all got together and put it together. I have to get my cherry sours out at this point. So that's good.
Because I'm pretty sure we're all some level of ADHD and need something to keep us occupied while we sit
I know. This is why it's always exciting. So we are most of us are in the area. I know Keith is in Tampa, so he's maneuvering, braving the poolside at Tampa as well. Myra does bookkeeping with us and a lot of other aspects of administrative engagements with us. If you haven't heard of Keith, Keith does I don't even know, Keith, you got so many different things. If you were engaging with the color commentary, Christianity in the Public Square, you saw a lot of Keith's work in the midst of some of the material that went along with it, the prayer project and some of the things that were engaged. So does a lot. He's one of our resident Theo bros, helps us maneuver through some of those things that we're engaging. So anyway, we're all here today, right? And so we thought it would just be good if we got into the studio and started thinking back over the last 2 weeks since the catalytic event of the election. We've recognized, if you've been watching us on social media, you've seen us commenting on lots of different things. If you're engaged in social media across the board, you see people talking about it. And so as we were just thinking about it, we're like, I know that there's a way in which we naturally, as threaded, would kind of put ourselves out there as how we comment. But we just wanted to give people a peek behind the curtain of how something like an election or some sort of catalytic event gets processed in the midst of our ministry, on our staff meetings, and as we talk about it. So we thought, hey, let's just open up and give people a peek into what a normal staff meeting might look like as we're processing that. So, so kind of a question that we usually would start with is, okay, it's been 2 weeks since the election. What sort of feelings are you guys having? Like, are there some sensations that you're feeling regularly or are feeling? Who wants to start us? So, Chino, you want to give us a little bit of how you're feeling now after it's been 2 weeks?
Yeah. Fear, anger, sadness, and then
it fluctuates. I feel like it's been a bit of a roller coaster of like feeling angry and sad and fearful about what's coming next. And then also balancing out a little with like who God is and who he says he is. But then still the minute you turn on the news or hear anything, it just, um, it's hard. And I was in church. I didn't go to church last week, but I did go to church this morning. And that was hard. I don't know that I was necessarily ready to be back, especially they opened with talking about walking in love and justice and righteousness. And it's just hard because I don't like, do people hear that and understand what that actually means? It feels like their words are coming out and people hear it and they digest it through their own lens and don't do anything. Like we walk outside of the walls and nothing changes with the way that we're interacting with each other or how we're helping other people.
Mm. So you're still, I know lots of folks have been kind of articulating that sort of fear and frustration, and you're still kind of feeling a little bit of that as well. So that makes sense. Yeah. Who else? What are we feeling, and maybe where those feelings come from?
For me, it would be like anxiety and uncertainty, just because I feel like for my background, I don't know what the future holds for my people that live here.
Talk about who your people are. Not everybody can see you, and I mean they may be able to hear a little bit in the accent, but just talk a little bit about
Mexican coming to this country illegally. My parents came here illegally. They're now legal residents and citizens. I was born in California, but my whole family came to this country illegally. So I don't know what the future holds for me and mine. So I feel anxiety about that, not knowing what's gonna happen. That's what I feel right now. But at the same time, I'm hopeful and I pray that we all are safe.
Yeah, it's helpful. Thank you.
And together.
What else? Who else? How are we feeling?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels, a lot of the for me, a lot of the conversation is, or the thought that I have is the kind of twilight zone of 2016. And it's not so much like, at least my wife and I were talking about how like it's, if there's anything that feels like a multiverse, where you feel like you're part of like the alternate universes. It's not so much the election results as it is the climate around the election and the amount of people and the way we are thinking about politics and interfacing with politics. It just feels so not like we were raised, so different, and it seems it feels so in some ways unreal to think that not only have we arrived, not only the election in the way that it did, but the path to that election to that outcome. It's just weird. It's weird that we are where we are, and then post the election, the amount of the environment that it seems is beginning. Man, it just, I don't know, feels Twilight Zone is the word we've been using in my house. It feels like you're in the Twilight Zone, like we're in some special episode. My wife was like, "Is this the Truman Show? Like, are we are we all being punked?" But it's not just about like, again, it's not so much about like just the outcome. Like for me, it's not like Trump or entirely. It's the environment, that we're in right now, and how different, how disconnected that environment is. So anyway, those are some some of my categorical thoughts.
Okay. Pepper?
I think I fluctuate a lot between, like Dr. Bach talked about, how you're a one, you could be one on the scale, you could be a 6 on the scale where you want to burn everything down. If you haven't listened to the episode, go listen to it. But I fluctuate between like I want to burn everything down, and then I come back to this place of, I don't know if it's peace or what it is. It's not peace, I don't think, but just this point of like, okay, 3 or 4, like there's stuff to do. There's lots of work to do. Try to listen and be understanding. And just also recognizing that like my life will not change. My life will not change, but I am still yet fearful.
Now, why do you say that your life won't change? What do you mean?
I just like, I feel like a lot of the big ticket issues that were discussed in this election won't really affect me or mine family. Like, I'm a woman, I can't have children anymore. I'm raising 2 boys. I'm married to a white man. He's a pastor at a mega church in Dallas. Like, I recognize that there's not a whole lot probably in my day to day that will change, but I'm still fearful of that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. Keith, you're in the more difficult position, I think, of all of us, based on, I think, where some of the, as Janelle was talking about, the big ticket items. She's talking about, being a white woman, not able to have kids, married to a white dude. You are a white male in this country. What do you do with all this? Like, what do you feel in the midst of it?
Yeah, I guess some of my bigger concerns are how will the church, like the real church, respond with an engagement that drives towards a real unity and an active commitment to still address injustices. I've got friends that are kind of silently celebrating in a way. You can tell by their tongue. And I think it's a time for the church to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. I mean, for those that are feeling a great sadness, there needs to be attentiveness to say, what's the grief about? What's not being addressed? And for those that are rejoicing, there needs to be some sense of willingness to listen, to say, well, what gives you hope? Those kind of things still need to happen. I also have interacted with an African-American pastor friend of mine who's involved in a national prayer gathering, who the sense of the white leadership of that prayer gathering was like, well, because of the outcome, we can be assured that God answered our prayers. But wouldn't God have been active answering prayers even if it were a different outcome? And so just even encouraging my friend to say, you're a voice to help bring a listening ear to this entire group. I think the church needs to be in those kind of spaces actively. For my white friends that are like, okay, wow, there's a whole red wave now, as if like we don't need to be engaged anymore, just watch the system do what it's supposed to do. I think it's all the more reason for the church to say, no, we have to be engaging with those who are unlike us. We have to be engaging in a way to address deep injustices. Those have not gone away. If anything, there could be greater division and polarization within the church, unless there's a real desire to want to listen, weep, and rejoice in all the ways that the Bible calls us to do so.
Yeah, and it's, what's hard is like that terminology. Even it feels almost outside of where potentially where Christians should be even thinking in terms of elections, right? Like the idea of weep and mourn, and rejoice, right? Like both of those they feel like the extremes of emotion in the midst of a kind of election like this that seem to, and I could be wrong, but when I hear them, it feels like a kind of despair and a kind of jubilation, and both seem like they don't seem like great responses for the church, because it feels like we've almost put our hopes in places that would inspire that kind of extreme response. Now, again, those are just in many ways those are just words. I'm just trying to spark a little convo in here. I don't know, Kylie, you hear this word rejoice, you know what I mean? Like, what do you feel about something like that in mourning? Like, how does that feel from a person who's like, if I can think about it, if I just real quick, just to kind of set the stage, I do think that there seems to be a lot of good conversation and necessary conversation about the ways in which women of color particularly are experiencing this. Obviously women at the top, and then you start to move into those who are of color. We hear it, Myron, what you're talking about, right? It's just being Mexican American, but also being a woman. So you've got the immigration piece as well. But just even thinking about the words and the ways that racism has played in, being for all intents and purposes, a Black woman in here as well. So Kylie, what do you, when you hear kind of this, what is this, Romans 12, this rejoice and more, what do you hear with some of that stuff, and how are you responding to that and thinking about it?
I'll be completely honest, like that verse in this context really challenges me. Because when I think of, I like how you put it with where is our hope, right? Because like when we're rejoicing or when we're mourning, both of those things are kind of on the extreme, and I think show like we've elevated something as a priority. And so if we've lost that, you've lost someone that you love, like you're in mourning, right? Or somebody you love is restored to you, like you rejoice. And I just wonder, so in Romans 12, it talks about like not being conceited and not thinking yourself more highly than you ought to. And it mentions like we're all part of one body and each of us have a different purpose. And it talks about all those things. And I would say celebrating is happening right now. I don't know if you could define that as rejoicing. I feel like gloating is happening. I don't know that you would define that as rejoicing. And I think if we're going to rejoice, shouldn't we rejoice for the things that God would rejoice for where God's heart is? And I think of like 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. I think about in I want to say it's Philippians, where he talks about like whatever is like noble, whatever is pure, whatever like is godly, think about, such things. And the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians, right? So I think we have these verses that show us like what God rejoices in. And I don't know that if we're looking at the candidates or what was the candidates, that in the actions, the rhetoric, the things that are being said, that it stole those virtues, those things. And so like, can we really, when people are being dehumanized, I don't think as Christians, we should be rejoicing with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Here's just a shot across the bow, right, for everybody. Did God care anything about this election? I mean, was he just like up there like, oh my gosh, oh boy, what's going to happen? Stayed up late, waiting for the results to come.
Checking his Twitter.
He's checking Fox and CNN. Like, I know it's a bit, I know, kind of cliche, but I just want to throw it out. Like, did God care about this election, and if so, why? If not, why not? What do you think?
I mean, I think most of us would say that he was very aware of the election. I think the question is he mourning with us about, like, what is he happy about? Now, is he happy about the results of the election or the pathway or the state of things at the moment, or is he unhappy with it? You have that thing where, Jesus wept, and the tension that we often have with scripture where God is asking guys like, I regret, there's these language of regret and jealousy and these various things, which I had never made them and this kind of stuff. And even in Jeremiah, you have, God's like, I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to be my servant, right? To put Israel into exile. or his people into exile, and yet I don't know that he's happy about it. And it's interesting you say when we say these. We were talking about earlier about terms like weep and rejoice. And the question is about what? Is it about the fact that all is lost, or is it about the fact that the lost are winning? Or that there still is that sin is still having an effect. And there's a part of me that laments that the church has lost more witness in the last 4 to 8 to 12 years. And that loss of witness is lamentable, weepable. You know what I'm saying? So it's what is it? What's the object of the weeping and rejoicing? I don't know that God is disheveled. I do know. I don't think he is, but I do think, or maybe for me, what I wonder is he happy with America right now? Or is he not, happy with America right now? And if it's his plan, to allow things to play out the way they did, is that plan about correcting us, or is that the pathway toward the sort of community that he desires for us? Like, should we, like, is this Nebuchadnezzar, to put it in a metaphor?
Mm-hmm.
Is this an exile season designed to draw us back to him? Or is this the ideal way he wants this country to go? Or is the country the subject at all? Is it the church that we should be thinking more about than the country itself? Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a series of thoughts that I should stop talking about now. I'll let some other people talk.
All right. Thoughts? Did God care about this?
Yes. I mean, I absolutely think he cares. I don't think he's standing behind. I don't know. I feel like I think of Isaiah 55, like his way isn't our way and it's higher than our way. And so for me, it feels a bit presumptuous when people are like, oh, this person won because like this was God's will. So it's like you're in the mind of God. Like, you know what his plan is. I don't know. That's just me.
No, that's helpful. Keith, did you have something to add to that? Look like you were.
Yeah, I think God cares about what his image bearers do, and collectively what those image bearers would do socially, to move towards justice and righteousness, which is the throne that he sits on, and the church specifically. I think he cares greatly about the church's ability to serve its communities in a way that would promote that direction. I don't think just because you have a particular party gets a win or an outcome that somehow that is justification for overlooking the immoral nature of the candidates or party or how that victory is won. I think God cares a lot about that too. I don't think he overlooks those things as much as what we may feel at times others in our country have kind of overlooked the immorality of the process. But I think he cares. I think he cares enough about the freedom of the will in the image of God that he's not going to dictate the outcome, as it were, against our will individually or socially. But what I think positively, that also means believers in the church have an incredible opportunity to will good and virtue in a world that is demonstrating increasing lack of care for virtue, it seems, in its leadership. So I think those things matter a great deal to God.
Yeah. Well, so you've got, if you turn it on, I know all of us, as we've maneuvered through, and you guys send me stuff from TikTok and Instagram, things of that nature, where people are ultimately, looking at the camera and they're telling you why they are breaking relationship with people, right? Like, particularly I see it, obviously, it tends to happen again. Whoever's losing tends to go down this road a little bit easier, right? Where they're like, look, you MAGA folk, I'm breaking relationship with you. And then ultimately kind of walking down a reasons of why they're doing that. how is that hitting us? Is that the space, or maybe I think I know the answer to that, so that's probably a loaded question. What would what can we as an organization of Threaded, if you will, how can we speak into that kind of engagement around how people are thinking about relationships in the midst of this moment right now? What do you think? How can we speak to that? Pepper, you got anything that's profound? Because I know you like to just break relationships with people all the time. So
I do. It's true.
So how are you maneuvering through the relationships you're trying to break with people? And
I did. I'm gonna have to confess to my mother before this airs, but there was a long time, and not about this.
I love it. I love the confession.
And I think I have a legitimate point. So bear with me as I try to connect the dots to get there, because I'm not a vocal processor. I'm an internal processor. So there was legitimately a time where I was considering breaking relationship with my parents and other relatives over something completely different. And I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. And I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I don't think God wants us to break relationship with people. I wonder if there is a time where it would be okay. Like some of my family, I no longer talk to them. They don't have access to me. They don't have access to my kids. But like, I think I have more questions. Like you asked me a question, but like I have more questions. Like, is there a time where it's okay? Like I watched this video today where there was a girl that was like, if you are willing to break relationships over this, you are part of the problem. We need to maintain connection and conversation and do all that well. And I was like, sure, I can understand that. If I'm sitting here in this room at this table, I understand that we need to maintain relationships. That's where a reconciliation organization, right? That needs to be. I should not be able to break relationships as quickly as I am if I'm going to work in this job. But the other side of that was the argument, that was stitched with it. How can you say that you love somebody when you are supporting, voting, agreeing with somebody who is built their platform on hate? Like I just have more questions. I did not explain that very well.
No, I think you're engaging in a conversation of where people are and trying to understand when people say that they want to break relationship, as we all do in the midst of this. We all think of ourselves as heroes in this conversation, right? We're not villains. So the hero move in what you just articulated is, hey, there's somebody who is maneuvering in an area that seems to be against the safety, if you will, of others, and the safety, the preservation of human rights and things of that nature. Why would I want to be in relationship with a person like that, right? Yeah. So I think that's where the hero thought is, right? And so we're just wrestling with, okay, what do we speak to that? Do we just go, hey, have at that, don't engage, or how else can we have that combo?
Well, I think the way people are talking about it is you're talking about like boundaries. So, okay. In the conversation when we have in relational conversations, when we talk about what do you do with abusive parties in a relationship, you draw lines. You say, hey, if I believe that my brother is a danger to my son, then he's not welcome in my house, right? And like I draw a line there, and that doesn't necessarily mean I don't have a relationship with my brother. It means that we've got this boundary, right? And I think when people are talking about what they're maybe trying to articulate, but maybe not doing it well, is saying, I want to draw a line between people who I think is harmful to me and to people I love and represent. And so there are women or there are people of color who are saying to people who voted in a way that they believe is harmful to them and promotes ongoing harm to them, is what I believe those persons would say. They present an ongoing danger, and because of that, I think they're drawing a boundary. So the question is, where is the line for that? Right? I think almost all of us would agree that boundaries in what we perceive to be something that is abusive or threatening or necessary. But where does that start and stop? And I think that's where people are wrestling. And of course, we're on the back end of an election like this, like the most likely boundary early is to say, I don't want you in my life at all, right? And to be like, and do make the most extreme result. But the question is, like, what does a relationship look like with someone who seems to promote ideas that is ongoingly abusive or hurtful to you? And it does call the question in one's brain, do you love me really if you are willing to promote something that is harmful to me? Now, so a lot of, like I said, a lot of women and people of color, and there's women here, so you guys correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I think the response to the Trump camp is that they believe that the Trump camp represents harm and abuse to these parties, and to vote for that, even if you found a way to rationalize, if that's true, and you found a way to rationalize voting for that, that makes that person unsafe. And I don't want to be in a relationship with someone that's unsafe, I think, is the mindset. So I don't know if that's helpful or not helpful, or maybe there's some way to build on that I'm missing.
I think what's helpful about that is that probably paints a picture of reality of where we instinctively want to go. And in doing so, we end up dehumanizing people according to what the parties represent.
Right.
Versus having a charitable assumption that, we were given in our system a choice that had a perception of immorality on both sides. And so to somehow say, because lost, therefore everybody on the other side is as immoral as the leader that was voted for is probably a judgment way too far, which is a way to say, Galatians 6, you who are spiritual, gently restore. This is hard for me, but it's constantly confronting me. Is like, I have to see my friends in an opposing party, right? As especially if they may be really kind of blinded by maybe a political ideology that I find is dangerous. I have to see that lovingly is like, well, they're deceived. And so how do I move towards them with gentleness? Because I want to move towards them with, let me show you how you're wrong and dismantle it all. But I have to believe that there's something good in them that is deceived, and that the relationship is worth it, so that I would want to still maintain interaction. But I have to gut check first to say, just because they may have voted in opposition to where I may have voted doesn't necessarily mean they're as immoral as the candidate that they voted for. I feel like that's a really important starting point.
Yeah, real quick, I know someone else can jump in, but I think what's hard about what you just said is deceived is the charitable way, like you said. To credit someone with deception is they just didn't know any better. They've been tricked. I think what people are feeling like they've negotiated that. Like they feel like, yeah. I think many people feel like you mortgaged or you ransomed the care of XYZ persons for this thing. And as a result of that, I'm part of the people you ransomed. You made a negotiation that you would give up in these folks' mind. I'm going to give up the livelihood of persons of color, women, what have you, in order to gain these wins. So I did it knowing full well what I was doing is what I think people, and is you gave us up. You sacrificed us. If it was up to you, if it came down to us or that, you gave us up. And that's the part that I think is hard for people, for us to come, to
Antoine, I completely agree with you. And even if I hear you use that language, I can envision sitting with some of my friends in kind of a more of a strong conservative camp, and they would be thinking and using the same kind of language
Right.
with regard to the opposite camp,
Yeah.
which then just promotes us versus them. And I think the idea of digging into, well, it somewhat is an arrangement of values, like which values you're putting in order, but it has to start with a sense of I'm committed to you as a person over the platform that I'm tempted to want to just associate or judge you by.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious, right? Because I know, and Myra, I'm thinking about you in the midst of this a bit, right? Like all of us, to some extent, are immigrants in this country, if you will. We kind of have come here, right? But the target that keeps coming back is those who are coming from the South, and particularly, Myra, like Mexican who are coming up, right? Like because it's and that's very specifically, right? You and I live down the street from one another, right? Like we maneuver through a very what I would call red county. Lots of people who don't look like us in the area, people who you are in relationship with on a regular basis that you know voted for this side that if you had to put a name tag about immigration, these would be a side who regularly talked about and continue to talk about the deportation of people who've been here and even the denaturalization of people who are already here, which really is all of us. All right, but they're not thinking about all of us who need to be denaturalized.
Thinking about my parents.
They're thinking about your parents, right? Like, so how do you? I mean, are you in the I'm breaking relationship? Like, how are you maneuvering through that just mentally and emotionally?
It's hard. It's so hard because I always go back to that, and that's my number. I mean, you put it in priorities. That's the number one for me because it affects me personally.
Sure.
But the people that I interact with on a daily basis that I truly love, it's hard to say I'm going to break that relationship with you because you probably voted for that. I don't know where that falls in their priority list. So I don't know if that's at the bottom. So they weren't thinking about, like Antoine said, throwing me under the bus kind of thing. So it's really difficult for me because there's so many people in my life that I don't want to break a relationship with because I truly love them and appreciate them. And they have been there for me in some really hard times in my life. So I struggle because, again, this is something that affects me personally. So I don't know how I feel. It's hard.
Yeah.
Myra, could you envision yourself speaking with someone close to you who believes differently and asking them questions about how do you feel about me personally when I kind of envision you hold to a political view that is something that is concerning to me. Like, does the prospect of having that kind of conversation seem to you or terrifying? Is that something you could possibly envision yourself having?
I think I could. Definitely, especially if it's a strong relationship.
Yeah. I think that's a powerful piece of what we're talking about. And I think it speaks to some of the things that have already been said is this idea of so much of the way that the elections work out is it kind of bolsters the extreme mentalities. And yet the people who are having to vote, if they have to vote for the two parties, they have to, the proverbial phrase is, they got to hold their nose and kind of pull the lever, right? But I like the way you said it, Myra. It's like there's a list of priorities that people have. And those priorities, if you will, out of they take up a percentage of their space as far as how they're thinking about voting. And maybe, but this is part of that Antoine was talking about. They negotiated you for those bigger priorities, and so there's still that sort of wrestle because, and you said it yourself, and I think everybody thinks it. And it's part of what's hard about it is most people go into these elections and they think about what's good, what's best for them. right? There's a kind of individualistic, a personal piece about it. And there's almost this sense of like, I'm not actually thinking about others in this. I'm literally just thinking about myself. So if I'm a Hispanic, I'm thinking about myself and I'm thinking, okay, this is what I'm gonna be doing. If I'm Black, I'm thinking about myself. If I'm white or if I'm somebody who's anti-abortion, like I'm thinking about abortion more than I'm thinking about losing my friend Myra in this. I would rather save, quote unquote, save babies than worry about whether Myra and her parents are gonna have to be sent back to Mexico.
Right.
Right. That's still it's still a difficult sort of relational, engagement to have. To say it out loud is almost worse. You know what I mean? It's almost like you don't want to have the conversation because you'd rather
Not know.
hear, not know. It's like it's which is the whole idea.
Don't
we
ask,
talk
don't
about
tell.
don't ask, don't tell. Who was it? I can't remember. We had a workshop once, and they were like the reason for the success of most churches is the lack of communication.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think it was Colin in the episode.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Just the lack of communication. Like part of what's holding us together is that we don't know how each other is thinking. And I feel like as much as that feels like peace, it's not. It's that negative piece, right? When there's this thing stirring underneath and we just are kind of playing at it. You know what I mean? And that to me is kind of where I feel like something's got to be done because the thing that's underneath what would be a little flame builds more and more until something that's some sort of gasoline is thrown on it. And then all of a sudden we're in this social eruption again. Right. And that's the thing that divides communities. It divides churches because we're actually not dealing and wrestling with it. And if I could say it like this, we are putting our hopes and our dreams in these false pieces, these false idols. And I think that's a place that the church has to figure out. How do we create a space where people can actually deal in peacemaking and shalom creation in an election? Is it possible? Is it possible to actually do this conversation in the church in an election season with a two-party system? I'm curious. Is it possible?
Well, I mean, I think you're right that we have to figure out how to do it, right? Because so to bring in some scripture, right? Because
scripture. Don't act like you're bringing it in. People have been dropping scripture for the last 35 minutes.
But I want to read something. So
all right.
So, but it's an interesting thing. So Paul's writing in Corinthians. So 1 Corinthians 5, and he says this. He says, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with the sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of the world who are immoral or the greedy and the swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or slanderer, a drunkard or swindler. Do not even eat with such people." All right, so that's the first one. So you're like, well, wow, that's Paul's like, hey,
yes, he gave me the excuse to meet with those people.
Gave me the out. I'm okay. Yeah, so I'm cutting relationships. So I did according to 1 Corinthians 5.
Slice.
Right, which I'm not sure that's what he exactly means, but it's worth wrestling with the fact that Paul is saying that. We do have to understand, like, what is Paul saying?
And he says something similar in Romans. Yeah.
Yes, of the church, he's very explicit to say in the body, right? He's like, if it was talking about the rest of the world, then you'd have to leave the world. But in the kingdom, he's talking about that. So we're talking about among brothers and sisters who are supposed to be one body and connected to each other. So that's one thing to contend with. And then he says in 12, "What business is mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside." And then he says, "Expel the wicked person from among you." All right, so that's one part. Now, but if you keep reading, his next part is now about, if any of you have a dispute with another, he's about to go on. I won't read it all, but he's about to go on and say, "Hey, I actually want to shame you for taking your disputes to the public." He's like, you're trying to just settle your disputes in the courts. You're trying to settle all of your stuff through the public means. Isn't it a disgrace? He said, I think the verse here is he says, I am writing this to verse 5. In 6:5, he says, I say this to shame you. Is it possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge a dispute between believers? In other words, I think he's trying to say two things. One, we have the whole thing at the beginning. It's like, hey, draw very clear lines, right? And we have to wrestle with the whole expel the wicked among you and have nothing to do with them. But then he follows that with, but you've got to have rigorous, he's using the conversation of lawsuit, but you've also got to have rigorous conversation among the believers to settle public social dispute. Now, those are probably individual pursuits, disputes, right? So the scripture is probably talking about, Marcus has defrauded me, so instead of taking Marcus to court, we can learn how to handle that among the believers. Why would we need the court if we are the carriers of morality? But I believe that you could probably zoom out on that concept to say not only for individuals, but you could probably say for a more larger context, you can take that same thing. Can we make room in the kingdom to discuss and wrestle through these sort of social disputes? And then it says, he's like, you're doing it in a public way, which actually he's insinuating actually causes people to see the kingdom in
a bad light,
messes with the witness of the kingdom. So I think that this 1 Corinthians 5 and 6 present us with these two sides of a coin that say we have to have very clear boundaries about what we will accept in the kingdom of God and who we will associate ourselves with, while also holding space for inside the kingdom, handling rigorous conversation around what it means to have social justice and do things appropriately. And I think that presents us with an interesting conundrum that we could explore. What does it look like for us in this modern moment?
What does it look like for us to pull people together to even have this discussion? Almost trusting in the spirit of unity, I guess you'd have to come with that, to be able to maneuver it with grace and peace. Again, you have to come to a conversation like that with a want to, right?
Like he says real quick, like to your point real quick, he says in verse 7, he says, the very fact that you have lawsuits among you to others, to the outside, means you have been completely defeated already. Why not rather be wronged? Is his point. Why not just accept the wrong? Or why not rather be cheated? Instead, you yourselves cheat and do wrong and do this to your brothers and sisters. In other words, it's more important to protect the unity and the connectedness. Like there's a different, the point of what it means to be together is even beyond the right and the wrong, as much as it is the kingdom thing. Anyway, all right, keep going. I cut you off, but what you were saying was connected to that.
Right. I think, Marcus, your one point in there is significant. If the assumption is that believers are having these rigorous dialogues within their tribe, within the community of the church or Christendom, then the fruit, the evidence of their belief is a fruit of a want to use your language. They will want to listen and engage. It's when you get on the extremes, folks that are just going to be content judging who doesn't belong. That's where it's okay. Well, maybe that's one of the points of having the rigorous debate, is that with whom you need to link shoulders with and serve, so that there's a deeper unity on display to address real significant issues of injustice in the world, rather than somehow assuming that we can trust legislation to do it for us. It just can't work that way. Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm in two different contexts regularly. I'm engaging with some guys that are more conservative, and they're quick at times to kind of discount folks on the other extreme as not believing in Jesus. I also engage with the local clergy in my community who are far more on the progressive end. And even within that group, there's some of the clergy that get tired of just all the political kind of alignment in talking, that they're thinking, but they don't even believe Jesus. It happens in both ends. And it's like the fruit of believing in Jesus is that there's a willingness to engage in difficult dialogue, because the unity that Jesus prayed for is worth it. It's significant to be moving towards.
Yeah, I think it's, Chino, I'll come to you in just a second. I think it's an important thing for all of us to recognize is that, and I don't know if you guys have done this, like I was literally this morning, I was reading through Romans, and there are points in which I found myself going, oh yeah, that's for that side, right? And then there was points where I was like, wait, but what if that's for me? What if I'm that? They're thinking the same thing about me, right? Like and I thought, what a very, I'm going to use this term loosely, right? I did say this when I was reading the scripture this morning. I go, man, how beautifully crafty is the enemy that it can create this scenario in which the believers all are going to the same source to find ways to justify why the other believers are wrong. They're looking at the same verses, and as they're sitting in, like I was just thinking, there are believers right now who go to church, that have gone to church on Sunday. They've heard their pastor talk about verses, and you can have believers who are on the red and on the blue, and they're hearing the same verse, and they're thinking it applies to the other person. And I thought, man, that is some crafty kind of division stuff that we need to keep in our brain as well. So, Chino, sorry.
Yeah, I have a few different thoughts, but just the hard part about the verses that Antoine shared, I feel like just from being a woman, is like those are the verses for why when we're sexually assaulted or abused, we're not going to go to the authorities. We're not going to go to the police because we need to handle it in our own groups. We're not going to air our dirty laundry out in front of everybody else. And then there's no accountability.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's a hard part of, like, I understand that's not the context you're necessarily referring it into, but I think that's like the hard part of just being a girl. And like, I mean, I don't know. I have like yet to meet a woman that's grown up in the church who either herself wasn't abused by somebody in the church or doesn't have a close friend who was. So it's like, there's one level of the discussion where it's like, I hear what you guys are saying, but I think the thing that people are struggling with is the trust. Because if you listen to the things that were said about Harris, especially because she's mixed race, so that hits close to home for me. So it's like, what do you think about me then? Like when I'm showing up, like, oh, now she's choosing to be this, or she's choosing to be that, or just the other, like Antoine, you talked about that earlier about just if it's safe or not. I think that's where a lot of the women of color are, is because you're saying these things, and yet we're the ones that are like getting the kids from point A to point B. We're the church logistics that are happening. Like women are at the center of that usually. So it's like, you're going to say these things, but then it's like, what is our place then? You know, like, what is our value in all of this? Because I mean, I remember being in high school and being told that I already had 2 strikes against me. One, because I was a person of color, and the other because I was a woman. And so that was going to go, you know, and anything I tried to do, like, you're already down by 2. And so there's a sense of like what happened with the election is reaffirming all of the things as women that we've encountered and been told about what we can't do or what we're not, or where our value or our place is. And so it's like, yes, there's this other part of me that's like, he won in the sense of he created the division, he sowed the division. And so if we walk away from the table, like, he's won even more. But it's really hard to want to be at the table when you feel like the other people there maybe don't even see any value in you being there.
Yeah, I think that resonates with a lot of folks. I think this is, if I can say, it's the piling on of the feeling, if you will, of marginalization that continually maneuvers through this country. right? I think the conversation that you're talking about in terms um, of of the ways in which people talk about each other. I can hear people who are listening are like, yeah, well, they talked about him because he was a rich white dude. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, but we're not talking about it like that. Like we're talking about it in places, in the ways in which those who have always been the victims of oppression and the victims of those who have power, and showing a kind of partiality to that mindset and that perspective, right? Raising that up and making sure that we all allow those who have not had the glory parts of the body, if you will, that they are raised up. I think that's a really big part of the conversation around the body of Christ. Is one of the beautiful things as we go through that the message in First Corinthians about that is that there are ways in which there are parts of the bodies who have not been given as much glory, that we actually spend more time listening and engaging and thinking through what they're engaging with. That's an important piece. And what we also see is, and this is where I think I even said this earlier, is this isn't our first rodeo, right? Like it's not our first rodeo. And I could say that very profoundly, thinking about it in terms of being a Black man and being a part of the Black diaspora, right? Like that includes men and women. Is that this is not the first time that people have said certain things about us and about others that are part of the marginalized group. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. Let's just be clear; it won't be the last. What we've seen is that more than half of America are willing to negotiate certain things with the understanding that this other part, right? The Hispanic immigrants, the Haitian immigrants, African American women, so on and so forth. That there are other things that can be negotiated with the potential of those groups feeling some kind of consternation and pain. Now, maybe it's because that's just the way it's always been, so people don't think anything of it. But at the end of the day, it's the way things have been, and we get an opportunity in many ways to connect with the resilience and the stories of people who've come through. I'll even say who have come through potentially worse than we have, and come out on the other side in such a way that we can actually be here on this call, having this discussion without the thought of somebody's going to break down the door and take me away because I'm talking about white people, I'm talking about whatever, right? So it's just something for us to continue to wrestle with and remember. For me, as I think about how accepted I think that those who are marginalized are feeling right now, and the history of what that's been before.
So, Kylie, I just want to tell you how impactful your words are to me, because it reveals just how many people or churches have misused the Bible and against folks. I'm really grateful to hear your perspective. A thought that comes to mind for me in an idea that wants to advocate for what you are sharing is, what would you hope to hear from in Christians or the church, or maybe who you would hope to hear it from, even, that would be bridge building towards a greater sense of safety? Yeah. Is that fair to ask?
I mean, yeah, I think it's fair to ask. I don't know if I have an answer. I feel like not reinstating pastors when they have, such like allegations of sexual misconduct against them so quickly would be a great starting.
Just the small things, I guess.
Or don't let them be able to resign. That word gets me every time. Well, I'm glad you could resign from your job.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that verse that says expel. Like it's Paul is the front end of that is get these people out of it, you know. So anyway, but go ahead, Kylie, finish what your thought was.
I mean, no, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know. I think this is a hard one because, depending on where your church is currently, you know, a woman's place, there's uh, they would say that they can't be in positions of like teaching or preaching, or, they need to be in children's ministry. You can only speak to the women, other things like that. So I don't know that I have but just to see like appreciation for the ways that women do contribute, and then also not always having to be siloed into the same roles. I think too, like that there's.
Thank you. And what it kind of highlights is some of the concern that I've kind of been thinking through this post-election season, is that the church has an even, I feel, greater responsibility to lean into its prophetic voice to call out injustice when it seems like there's this perception, if not reality, of certain politicized Christian voices justifying the means to the neglect of immoral ends, right? And it seems like the church. I want to be a part of the church still calling out wrong, period, regardless of its political stripe. And anyway, I just thank you for sharing what you did. I'm moved by that.
And I think it's helpful for people who are listening, maybe who are trying to understand, I think trying to understand the ways in which people are wrestling with this. What you're bringing up, Kylie, what I'm hearing in there is a way in which voting for or seeing this candidate that has win sends a message, right? And it's a message, particularly because of everything that Kamala represented, right? Multiracial woman in a position of power, and it's almost this message of, you don't get to do that, like we get to do that, or we don't want that here, which is where you would hear again, and then understand that there's a group of people that ultimately call themselves Christians that subscribe to the same deal, and that just reinforces what it sounds like you have, and maybe other women have experienced in the church as well. So it feels like it felt like a great opportunity for a step forward, and a convincing step, maybe for people to kind of feel like, oh, maybe we're moving forward, but it was handedly said, no, you have to stay where you are, in the place that you are, and that speaks to, I think in Kamala's body, of just her story. There are so many groups that saw themselves, right? You do have the immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. The immigrant story that came through. And so there's a sense that, maybe an immigrant getting into the Oval Office will spark a kind of change, or will signal a kind of change that we hope for in America. You have a person who is a person of color, right? Obviously a mix, but a person of color, right? Again, another sort of signaling forward. Now you have a kind of signaling in Obama, right? Which leads to the third piece, which is the distinction, if you will, against where Obama was, is that it's a woman, and in both times that this candidate has come against a woman, everybody has said no, and so that I think is, if I'm seeing it, like if people are watching how people are responding online and whatnot, like that is a consistent piece that's happened over and over again, that keeps kind of speaking, and again pushed out by a good percentage of the church at the same time. Is that a fair articulation? Did I overstate and understate anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth noting for the people who are motivated by what some people say, well, that's identity politics, and I didn't base my vote on those identity markers. It was on policies. There's going to be some people that say that, but for those people who But I would make the case in addition to that, that the identity politics at play here also is the white male. It's interesting because I was in a conversation. Someone's like, "Well, I don't play identity politics," and then he went on and listed all the identities that people voted for except the white male, and I'm like, "Whoa!" I think part of Trump's appeal was that he appealed to the white male. For many people, it was an identity politic vote. They were white males. The white male felt attacked and undervalued. They saw that Trump was one that would value them, and so they voted that way for them. So I think to your point that you were saying earlier, sometimes we say these things and it seems to have more resonance than one side than the other. While Kamala did have this representation, she represented a lot of people and they saw themselves in her. Donald Trump represented something that a bunch of people saw themselves in. And it's worth noting that that's a real thing. And sometimes it's worth saying out loud because the white male, because it's normal, doesn't get counted as a something. Like only the other things get counted as something. So only you know what I mean? So I think that's interesting.
Well, and with that, just so I think it's really also helpful to recognize is that white is not just a skin color, it's an ideology, right? So there's an ideology that Trump, I think, pushed forwards that connects with this idea of whiteness and all the things that has meant in America, which you can articulate into individualism, you can put into capitalism, competitivism, things of that nature, that's not only interesting to males who phenotypically look white, but also it spoke to males who like and desire to connect with that kind of ideology, right? So you still have a lot of Black males who would vote for Trump because of the ideology of whiteness that many people in the midst of their racial, ethnic, and cultural identity formation still long for in the midst of the American Anglo society. I think you'd see it in Hispanic males as well, right? Particularly those who have maybe been born here, been here for a while, who are Hispanic thinking in terms of like language of Spanish, who are coming from more white side versions of Hispanic, of the mestizaje of the Hispanic population, that still grab onto that ideology. Also, white women can grab onto this ideology of male patriarchy as well, right? So there is something in that move of Trump that still drew a lot of people, not just white phenotypical males, but there's something about the ideology that's really interesting, I think, to people, because you can't win with just the white males, right? You needed others to win. So it's just a reminder of that too. And there's probably some Christian aspects to that too, as well. So as we kind of close it out in here, I'm just curious, like, lots of good convo around it. Lots of really good perspectives, some wrestling. This is kind of it's kind of the stuff we would talk about. Just for the audience, maybe, like, how are you all, like, what are some tools that you're utilizing to process what's happening today, right? I think we're going to have lots more processing. There's going to be lots more triggering, all that stuff. But like today, is there anything that you're using to help you process this a bit? Phrases, tools.
Well, I'll go and so maybe give some folks some room to think about.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a couple of things. One, there's the idea that, as stogie as it may sound, that the church is remaining, keeping identity in Christ and remaining in the space of my job or my time on this earth has more to do with what the kingdom is doing than what anything else is doing. And so for me, that means, so when we're thinking about, if you remember that typography that Daryl Bach gave us, the 1 to 6, I was looking at that this morning actually, and I was thinking, well, really, whether it's the Christian nationalists on one side or the tear everything down revolutionists on the other, the power is on the edges, and the people are in the middle of that paradigm, at least in my head. And so I was doing it. I was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there was a line in between 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and it feels like shalom is in the 3-4 space. Like whatever the kingdom, whatever God's doing through the kingdom is in that 3-4 space. The more you move to the edges, the more you're looking to use. The more you get away from what the church is, what God's doing through the kingdom, and taking matters into your own social hands. And so I think that if that's true, then as believers, we're going to always be living in a 1 or 6 kind of world, and really what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what's the weather today. I was talking about this with context, like, we're just really trying to figure out what is it going to look like to minister and bring the kingdom of God into our current moment. I don't think we're ever going to get shalom through 1s and 6s. We're going to have to do it ourselves while dealing with 1s and 6s. And so it's either stormy weather or it's a drought. But in either case, we just need to figure out, like, what is the context of our ministry? So for me, that's a lot of words to say. I'm finding a lot of comfort or purpose in realizing that my work here will never truly be done, but the weather is just going to be changing. And so I just need to figure out, what does it look like to minister now? And so with Donald Trump having been elected, the weather has changed. We might need to put some umbrellas down, or rather maybe take the shorts off and grab some umbrellas, or something about the weather's changed. And so the question is, who am I meant to be in this moment now? And what does it mean to be and represent the kingdom in this context? Knowing that there is never going to be a context in which I don't need to do something, like I won't be competing or struggling against something. Mm-hmm. There's a part of me that just is resigning to the fact that the work will always be there. And it's just what kind of work it is. And so instead of getting upset about the fact that it's going to be hard work, I think I can lament it hard work because everybody wants it to be easy. But I would rather spend my time figuring out, okay, so what's changed and how do we affect kingdom business in this new arena? So that's one thought. I'll save the second thought for later, maybe.
I don't know. We got time for second thoughts.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So we may be done with that. So so the context, living into the context of what it means to be in the kingdom, and the election just changed the context, and that just means that I go back into a learning position, and a opening my hands to the Spirit of God position. Say, okay, God, what are you doing now, and what do you want me to do in it?
Yeah, if I were to piggyback on that, the context, it's like I have to be personally all the more alert and attentive to what context I'm in, how I'm feeling, how I may be perceived in this context. I know when I'm with more my white brothers in a discipleship group context that are either more conservative politically, or even influenced by the fringes of white nationalism, I'm constantly baiting the hook for dialogue on politics so I can remind them how we interact is more important at times than where we might land. When I'm visiting with my Black brothers and sisters who are leaders in ministries or organizations, I have to be aware that I've got more bridge building to do and a lot more listening that needs to be done, and leading with that tone. But I have to just be really mindful of what context I'm in at the moment.
Good. Ladies.
So for me, I'm not sure where I'm at today. Is more, I'm looking into like educating myself to prepare myself and my family, because I don't know what the future holds. So that's where I'm at. And I'm not, I feel like I don't have time to be angry or sad. I need to be more prepared.
Yeah.
I think we all want the same thing, right? We want to be safe. We all want love. We all want happiness. And when we came to this country, I feel like that was offered to us. I just wish that I felt like that was still the case.
Mm-hmm.
That everybody wanted that same thing for other people, not just themselves.
That's helpful. Thank you, Myra. Thank you for that and the continual engagement with that. That's really good. Y'all gonna make me call the others out? You mean, you know? Go ahead, Kylie.
I'm gonna wait for Janelle, but yeah, no, I could go. I think the thing that I've been thinking, and which I feel silly saying this because it just hit me in the last 2 weeks, and maybe everybody else knew this, but from our episode with Caitlin Scheiss, talking about spiritual disciplines and the church that I grew up, I did not know that spiritual disciplines were a way to have a sustainable rhythm of life. I grew up in a very conservative church, a church that believes you can lose your salvation. So the way I always thought of like prayer, reading your Bible, all of that is like, that's what you have to do to like be close to God, to like ensure you're saved, and not necessarily realizing that those things are what also help you like have a sustainable rhythm, like in the hard, when things are difficult, like the strength and the hope, and like by practicing these things that the Bible like talks about like caring for others and praying and being in your Bible and just like all the different things, it also provides like rejuvenation for you, and it helps you like continue to do the work, because like Antoine was saying, like there's work that needs to be done, and I know that that's what we're called to. So for me, it's just now clicking like how those spiritual disciplines like tie in with it, and it feels really silly to say because I feel like, having grown up in the church, I should know this, right? I should know this. But yeah, so I forget the question you asked, actually.
how you're answering it, buddy. I was going into what tools are you using to process going forward? So you're answering it. You were doing great. Now you've revealed to the audience that you had no idea what I was talking about.
Get no credit for any of those.
We were all really impressed, and then all of a sudden, here we go.
I'm still impressed.
Okay.
I thought a little, and I was going to wrap it up, and then I was like, I need his question to remember why I'm talking about spiritual disciplines. So that's what I'm doing. It's just realizing, like, especially for where we're at right now, I feel, especially prayer. I like to read anyways, so like being in the Bible has been something that has come a little more naturally to me, and so that I'm usually fairly consistent with, but the prayer side, I am not. And I just have been feeling more conviction about just like being in prayer consistently. So.
All right. It's good. Peppa, don't make me wait. What you got?
I really liked what Keith said, and I think that's where I've been, is this like defining the context, like for me. Knowing the setting of like keeping my mouth shut and listening, this is one context where I felt like my voice needed to be a little bit quieter so that Myra and Kylie could talk, but also recognizing that like I need to continue to have conversations in the circles of my white brothers and sisters, and the context of, my husband's youth pastor. So of those youth kids, I'm always pushing them to think outside of themselves. So just that was super helpful, because that you put into words what my brain's been thinking, but I haven't been able to identify well or put into a definition well. But just understanding what context I'm in and understanding what is needed for me in that moment. And then I think about how the holidays are around the corner, and we don't live near family, but for whatever reason, family feels like they're coming down for Christmas this year, like all sides of the family.
All exciting. That's
So
gonna be fun.
exciting, which is a whole other podcast series. And so I keep thinking about, because I know the conversation that's coming, because it's a conversation that we had in 2020. It's not going to go well, and so I've already prepared myself. And Monica Guzman's podcast was just so helpful on so many levels of like, of one, where she's just like, hey, like, have good conversations. Are we cooking or are we burning? Are we listening to each other? Are we giving each other space? And knowing that probably in one of those conversations, I'm going to have to go, hey, you know what? I love you. You're part of my family. I'm a part of your family. But we can't have this conversation because we're burning the soup. And knowing that in a couple other conversations, we'll have great conversation. And I look forward to those because they are loving and caring and open. And so just thinking through that podcast, if you've not seen it, please go watch it. It's amazing. And then thinking about our wage, which I can never remember the last two letters. So wage is what if I'm wrong. A is always assume the best, and I don't know what G and E are because honestly, those two I struggle with. So
You're like, I can't even get to those. I'm just trying to get through the first.
I'm just focusing on like, what if
I'm wrong? G is get different perspectives, and E, this is also why it's hard. Envision the best.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
I think about that.
That's really good. And just to make a note off of what you're saying about the holidays, those who are listening, be on the lookout. We have a navigating the holidays. I don't know if we call it I don't know what we'd call it, a white page, something.
A toolbox.
Toolbox. Yes, there we go. A little toolbox coming your way. So that you get into the holidays, you can.
So we're like hitting people with like hammers.
Yes, we won't give you actual toolbox.
No,
that's not. Maybe that's not the right word. Yeah, maybe we need to change the wording on that a little bit.
I like that though. Sometimes people need a hammer.
I mean, when there's a nail, you need a hammer, but sometimes you need a saw. It's a little different. I think it's really great hearing you guys process and kind of understanding. It's helping me grow, and I think that's part of what I'm using as my process. I'm really trying to make sure I monitor my algorithm, if you will. It can be really easy to just to use. We've used Dr. Bach's framework a lot of times. Like it can be easy to kind of move into the thing that you're always in. So if you're a 4, you can be pulled into a 5, right, in the midst of stress. If you're a 2, you can be pulled into 1 in the midst of stress. And I know that for myself too. Like if I'm looking at all the things as I scroll, the things that keep hitting me, I kept going, why do I keep getting sent these videos? You know what I mean? Like I haven't seen certain videos that I'm like, I think there are other videos out there, but I don't get sent those. Right. And I think it's just monitoring that for me is how I'm processing. It's trying to keep my mindset in. There is another story out there, right? That's wrestling through this in a completely different ways. And I need to be pulled out of my algorithm occasionally to make sure that I stay in the place that I can make myself available to engage in conversations that I think are going to be helpful for the church to have in it. And I really think part of that is having you all in my life as well, right? When we can sit down like this, we can challenge each other on those things. We can push against, we can pull each other out, or we can push each other deeper in. Like, no, you need to be deeper in your algorithm. You ain't going deep enough, right? Mm-hmm. But that's how I'm processing, and we'll continue to process. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that with you guys here today. Thank you for your time and energy, and those who are listening, thank you for engaging. Hope you were blessed by this as we were, and know that this is a regular way in which we try to unpack some of the things that are going on, and maybe we'll need to do this again as the time comes along. So to Benedict, if I may, right, is that we pray that the Lord will be with you, right, and that His face will shine upon you, that you will be blessed by His continual care and His continual attention on the people of God and those who are image bearers as well. And finally, we pray and hope that as you move away from these spaces, that you will be able to see through the many lenses that God has presented to all of us as we go into this. And we pray that God will help you to stay colored.